There is a specific kind of quiet exhaustion that many men carry, one that is almost never discussed. It is the weariness of doing everything right and still being told that it is not enough. If that sentence resonates with you, stay with me. This is a place where we strip away fantasy and discuss real, practical psychology to help men navigate relationships, pressure, and their own development in the real world. There is no fluff and no theory for the sake of theory, just things you can actually use. Today, I want to share a story that is going to make a lot of men feel seen for the first time. And brother, I mean truly seen. This is about why some women seem fundamentally incapable of being happy, and why no matter how hard you try, nothing you do ever quite lands. This isn't about hating women. It is about understanding patterns so you stop bleeding energy into a problem that cannot be solved the way you have been trying to solve it. I received an email from a viewer we will call Robert. He is 40 years old and works as a project lead at a civil engineering firm in the Midwest. He has a solid career, has been married for 8 years, together for 11, with 2 kids and a decent house in a quiet suburb where everyone waves but no one really knows each other. From the outside, it is the kind of life people say they want. And yet, Robert's wife was unhappy the entire time. Robert wrote, "I'm sending this because I lost almost a decade believing I was the problem. I thought if I just fixed myself enough, things would finally settle." He didn't say that bitterly. He said it tired. It is the kind of tired that comes from trying harder every year and getting less back. He did what men are told to do. He chased promotions to make more money. When she said he worked too much, he scaled back and took a less demanding role. When she said she felt disconnected, he planned date nights. When she said he didn't communicate well, he read the books. Love languages, emotional intelligence, attachment styles, and therapy worksheets. He learned all the right words. He showed up, he listened, and he adjusted. It didn't matter. She was unhappy when they were broke, unhappy when they were comfortable, unhappy when he was gone all day, and unhappy when he was home more. Every solution just uncovered a new complaint, like peeling an onion that never ends. Robert said the moment that finally rattled him was realizing the complaints contradicted each other. One year it was, "You're never around." The next year it was, "I need more space. You're always here." That is when the ground started to shift under him. Robert met his wife, let's call her Emily, when he was 29. She was 27 and worked in healthcare administration. She was sharp, attractive, and energetic. Early on, things were electric. She laughed easily, initiated intimacy, and talked about the future like it was something she genuinely wanted, not something she was trying to escape into. Robert wrote, "I remember thinking, this is it. This feels easy." What he didn't realize at the time was that he was watching a performance. About a year in, the tone changed. Not dramatically, which is important, but subtly. There were comments about how he loaded the dishwasher, a sigh when he suggested a weekend plan, little corrections, and a heaviness that seemed to follow her around like bad weather. Robert assumed it was stress, work pressure, or normal relationship adjustment, so he adapted like men do. He tried harder. The criticism slowly became background noise. His driving wasn't right. His food choices weren't right. The way he joked with friends wasn't right. Nothing was terrible or catastrophic. It was worse than that. Nothing was ever quite good enough. By year 3, he started tracking it mentally. The wins, the things that should count. A raise, a trip, a well-planned dinner. Each win vanished almost immediately, replaced by the next thing that was missing. The goalpost didn't just move, it sprinted. Robert actually wrote out the progression once because he felt like he was losing his mind. Year 1. We need to save more. He cut expenses, worked overtime, and built a safety net. Done. Year 2. This apartment feels cramped. He found a better place and moved. Done. Year 3. I want to get married. He proposed and planned the wedding she wanted. Done. Year 4. We need a house. He stretched financially and bought one. Done. Year 5. I want a baby. They had a child. Done. Year 6. I feel like I'm doing this alone. You're never home. He took a pay cut to be present. Done. Year 7. I need space. I feel suffocated. That one broke him. That is when Robert realized something most men never want to admit. The problem wasn't the money, the house, the job, the baby, or his effort. Those were just containers, temporary shapes her unhappiness poured itself into. The unhappiness was already there long before him. And once that idea lodges in your mind, you can't unsee it. Because if the problem isn't the circumstances, then what exactly have you been killing yourself trying to fix? Before we go deeper, I want you to pause and reflect. If this story feels familiar, acknowledge it to yourself. It is a way of recognizing something you might not have said out loud yet. If these experiences resonate with you, consider joining a community of men who are done blaming themselves for problems they didn't create and are ready to build clarity, strength, and peace through real psychology. Because in the next part, we are going to widen the lens and look at where this kind of unhappiness actually comes from and why. Once you see the pattern, you will never interpret it the same way again. Once Robert stopped obsessing over what he was doing wrong, something else came into focus. It didn't happen overnight. It came from a moment so ordinary it almost didn't register at the time. The first time, he met Emily's mother. They flew out to visit her in upstate New York for a long weekend. It was a small town, the same house Emily grew up in. Robert remembers noticing the pattern within the first 10 minutes. Her mother, let's call her Susan, was in her early 60s, divorced, and living alone. She complained about the traffic before they even sat down. Then it was the restaurant choice, then the neighbor's dog, then her co-worker, then politics, then the weather. It was relentless. What struck Robert wasn't just the complaining. It was that every positive statement immediately got canceled out. "The backyard looks nice this year," Susan said, before adding, "but the taxes are killing me, and my knees can't handle the yard work anymore." Nothing was allowed to exist on its own. Every silver lining had to be dragged back into the shade. Robert watched Emily respond automatically. Susan complained, Emily validated. Susan escalated, Emily soothed. It was smooth and polished, like a dance they had practiced for decades. There was no resistance and no surprise, just muscle memory. Later that night, Robert asked about Emily's dad. The shift was instant. Her shoulders stiffened. "He left when I was 11. We don't talk." End of discussion. Over the years, the fuller picture came out in fragments. Her father hadn't just left. He had been emotionally absent long before the divorce. He was always working and rarely affectionate. When he finally walked away, he didn't just leave the marriage. He disappeared. Birthday cards stopped after a couple of years. Visits became occasional, then non-existent. Emily was raised by a woman who was chronically dissatisfied and emotionally dependent on her daughter. Susan didn't lean on friends, she leaned on Emily. She used her as a sounding board, a regulator, and a substitute partner. Day after day, she modeled the same lesson. Life disappoints, men fail, and happiness is temporary at best. Robert wrote, "I didn't understand it then, but I was watching my future. Once he saw it, he couldn't stop seeing it." Emily wasn't an anomaly. She was part of a pattern. Her grandmother, Susan's mother, was in her late 80s and still bitter about choices she had made in her 20s, still nursing grudges from decades ago, and still finding fault in everything her family did for her. Emily's aunt had been divorced twice. Her cousin was in a marriage defined by low-grade misery and constant resentment. Different lives, but the same emotional baseline. This wasn't just learned behavior. It was deeper than that. Research on happiness consistently shows that baseline emotional set points matter a lot. Roughly half of a person's long-term happiness range is influenced by genetics. Some people are wired closer to optimism, while others tilt naturally toward pessimism. You can think of it like a thermostat. External events might spike the temperature temporarily, but it always drifts back to its default. Emily seemed to inherit not just her mother's worldview, but her neurochemistry, a brain inclined toward threat, dissatisfaction, and rumination. Layered on top of that was an environment that reinforced negativity as normal and contentment as suspicious. There was no model for stable peace, no example of quiet satisfaction, just constant scanning for what was wrong. And brother, that combination is brutal inside a relationship. Because when someone grows up marinating in dissatisfaction, happiness doesn't feel safe. It feels temporary, fake, or undeserved. Complaining becomes how they connect, how they feel alive, and how they bond. If they stop complaining, who are they? Robert started to realize something else that shook him. Emily didn't just feel unhappy. She expected to be unhappy. Disappointment was baked into her expectations. So when disappointment showed up, it felt familiar, confirming, and almost comforting in a twisted way. That is why no achievement stuck. The moment a goal was reached, the emotional system recalibrated to find the next problem. Peace wasn't relief. It was a threat. Something must be wrong if nothing is wrong. This is how unhappiness becomes an identity rather than a state. And identities don't change easily. Robert remembered moments when life genuinely aligned, finances were stable, work was calm, kids were healthy, and there were no fires to put out. Those should have been their best times. Instead, Emily would start fights over nothing, dig up old grievances, stir tension with extended family, and manufacture chaos. At the time, Robert thought it was bad timing. Now he sees it clearly. Calm felt unfamiliar to her nervous system, while chaos felt like home. Once you understand this, a painful truth becomes unavoidable. You cannot out-effort someone's baseline. You cannot love a person into a nervous system they were never taught to regulate. You cannot provide your way out of a worldview that was formed before you existed. And yet, most men spend years trying. If you recognize these generational patterns, if you saw a mother, a grandmother, or an echo of something you have lived with, recognize that pattern now. Because next, we are going to look at how modern culture pours gasoline on these dynamics, how fantasy, social media, and comparison turn baseline dissatisfaction into something that feels endless and personal. Once Robert understood the family pattern, another layer snapped into place. This one explained why things didn't just stay bad, but got heavier over time. Why every year felt harder than the last, even though on paper, life was improving. Fantasy had entered the room, and it never left. Robert started noticing how Emily consumed media. There were romantic shows where one grand gesture solved years of emotional neglect, and movies where the man finally gets it, shows up with flowers, says the perfect thing, and suddenly the woman's entire inner world rearranges itself. Then there was social media. Instagram, Pinterest, lifestyle blogs, with perfect kitchens, perfect vacations, and perfect couples smiling into sunsets. He wrote, "She'd watch a movie where the guy surprises the woman with some dramatic moment, and then she'd look at me like I'd failed an exam I didn't know we were taking." Real life doesn't compete well with edited fiction, and it never will. Emily wasn't comparing Robert to real men living real lives. She was comparing him to a highlight reel stitched together by algorithms designed to provoke envy. Their actual home felt dull next to staged interiors. Their real vacations felt inadequate compared to curated perfection. His consistent practical effort looked invisible next to cinematic gestures that don't exist outside a script. What made it worse was that Emily truly believed the next external upgrade would unlock her happiness. The right house, the right trip, the right lifestyle, the right version of Robert. Every "if only" carried hope. And every time it was achieved, the hope evaporated. That is when Robert identified what he called the devaluation mechanism. Before they had the house was the answer. After they bought it, it was just a house with problems. Before the kids, children would complete the family. After the kids, it was exhaustion and sacrifice. The same applied to Robert himself. During the pursuit phase, he was exciting, chosen, and special. Once secured, he became ordinary, a husband, a list of flaws. "She could only want what she didn't have," Robert wrote. "The moment she had it, it lost its shine." This is the curse of perpetual wanting. The chase feels alive, but the having feels empty. And so the wanting transfers to the next object over and over. Nothing holds value once it becomes real. Social media poured fuel on this cycle. Robert watched Emily scroll and saw her mood shift in real time. A friend's vacation photo darkened her expression. A co-worker's kitchen renovation triggered a sigh. An acquaintance's anniversary post sparked a comment about what Robert hadn't done. "She was comparing our behind-the-scenes to everyone else's highlight reel," he wrote, "and we were always losing." What Emily never saw was the reality behind those images. The friend on vacation was quietly discussing divorce. The co-worker with the new kitchen was buried in debt. The smiling anniversary couple fought constantly off-camera. Emily was building resentment based on a fictional world, and Robert was paying the price for failing to match a fantasy that didn't exist. This comparison didn't stop at lifestyle. It extended to Robert as a man. Someone's husband bought a luxury car. Why hadn't he? Someone's partner planned a surprise trip to Europe. Where was hers? A co-worker got a massive engagement ring. Suddenly, the ring Robert chose years ago felt insufficient. There was no context and no trade-offs, just endless comparison. Then, there was the mask. Looking back, Robert realized Emily had been different early on. Lighter, more agreeable, and more appreciative. She laughed off small annoyances, expressed gratitude easily, and seemed content just spending time together. That wasn't her baseline personality. That was her audition. Once she felt secure, once marriage, kids, and shared responsibilities locked the relationship in, the mask came off slowly, then fully. What emerged was someone chronically dissatisfied, quick to criticize, rarely grateful, and emotionally draining to be around. Robert later learned this is common. People with low baseline happiness often perform differently during courtship, sometimes unconsciously. They access their best self long enough to secure commitment. Once permanence sets in, the nervous system relaxes and reverts. He didn't marry the woman he dated, he married the woman behind the performance. And here is the strangest part. During periods when life genuinely went well, when there were no obvious problems, Emily became worse. She picked fights, revived old grievances, and created drama where none existed. Peace felt wrong to her. suspicious, and unfamiliar. A nervous system raised in tension doesn't trust calm, so it recreates what it knows. Chaos feels like home. Stability feels like waiting for something bad to happen. That is when Robert realized happiness wasn't just absent for Emily. It was threatening. It challenged her identity, her worldview, and her emotional home base. And without realizing it, he had been trying to build a peaceful life with someone who couldn't tolerate peace. If you have felt this, if you have watched effort lose value the moment it landed, you have been devalued. Now, we must talk about the real cost of living inside this dynamic and the moment when the guilt finally breaks. By the time Robert hit year 10, he barely recognized himself. It wasn't a dramatic collapse or an explosion. It was erosion, slow, quiet, and almost polite. It is the kind that happens when you keep telling yourself, "This is just how relationships are," while pieces of you quietly disappear. When they met, Robert had been confident, opinionated, and social. He had hobbies, he lifted weights, and he played pickup basketball on weekends. He had friends he laughed with and arguments he enjoyed. Over time, all of that faded. Not because Emily demanded he give it up directly, but because everything he enjoyed eventually became inconvenient, criticized, or subtly discouraged. He stopped suggesting activities because they were never right. He stopped sharing small wins because they'd be minimized or reframed as problems. He stopped expressing preferences because disagreement led to tension. He learned to read moods like a radar system, constantly scanning for incoming storms. "I became invisible in my own life," he wrote. "All my energy went into managing her emotions. I had nothing left for myself." The guilt was the heaviest part. Robert truly believed he was failing as a husband, that if he could just find the right words, the right gesture, or the right adjustment, something would finally click. He didn't feel angry. He felt responsible. And responsibility without agency is a special kind of hell. His friends noticed, his family noticed, and his work performance slipped. He gained weight, lost momentum, and lost joy. Yet he still blamed himself. The breakthrough didn't come in couples therapy. They had tried that more than once. It came in individual therapy, something Robert started quietly, almost embarrassed, like admitting defeat. In one session, his therapist asked a simple question. "Was Emily happy before she met you?" Robert froze. He thought about the stories she'd told him, her 20s, her childhood, her early relationships, her job complaints, her resentment toward her parents, and her sense that life never quite delivered what it promised. No, she hadn't been happy. Then the therapist asked the question that cracked everything open. "Do you believe you can fix something that existed before you?" That question hit like a weight dropping, because the honest answer was no. And if the answer was no, then what exactly had he been carrying all these years? Her unhappiness wasn't caused by him. It wasn't about him, and it wouldn't be solved by him. He was the current target, not the source. If he disappeared tomorrow, the unhappiness would simply find a new container. That realization didn't make Robert euphoric. It made him calm. The guilt he'd carried for a decade started to lift. The belief that if he just tried harder, she'd finally be satisfied. That belief dissolved, not with anger, but with clarity. He'd been trying to solve someone else's equation with variables he didn't control. This is where we zoom out, brother, because Robert's story isn't rare. It's a pattern. And once you understand the psychology, it becomes painfully obvious. Baseline happiness is largely internal. Research consistently suggests roughly 50% of long-term happiness variation is genetic. About 10% is circumstantial. The remaining 40% comes from internal processing. how someone interprets reality. That means someone with a low baseline can win the lottery and return to dissatisfaction within months. Someone with a high baseline can face serious hardship and still recover emotional equilibrium. When you encounter a woman who is chronically unhappy, you are not dealing with a motivation problem. You're dealing with a baseline problem. Childhood matters here. A daughter raised with an absent or emotionally unavailable father often carries unconscious resentment toward men. She expects disappointment. She may choose men who confirm it or create disappointment where none needed to exist. A daughter raised by a chronically dissatisfied mother learns that unhappiness is normal, even virtuous. Complaining becomes the primary emotional language. Modern culture amplifies this. Social media creates endless comparison. Romantic narratives sell fantasy. Therapy culture sometimes reinforces external blame instead of accountability. Add entitlement programming, the idea that a woman is a prize and men exist to earn approval, and respect erodes. Without respect, dissatisfaction is inevitable. Here is the hardest truth. Most chronically unhappy people don't change because change requires responsibility. To become genuinely happy, you must accept that your emotional state is your responsibility, not your partner's, not society's, and not your past's. Blame is easier than responsibility. It's easier to say, "He doesn't make me happy," than, "I don't know how to be happy." Culture rarely challenges this, so the pattern repeats from generation to generation and relationship to relationship. If you're in Robert's position, understand this clearly. You cannot make an unhappy woman happy. Her unhappiness is not your failure. It predated you and will continue unless she chooses to confront it herself. Every attempt you make to fix it will drain you further. Your responsibility is not to fill someone else's void. Your responsibility is to live your own life with clarity and self-respect. Some men choose to stay and manage. That's a valid choice if made consciously, not from guilt. Some men choose to leave and find partners whose baseline allows for contentment. That's also valid. What's not valid is destroying yourself, trying to fix something that isn't yours to fix. Robert is still married for now. "I stopped trying to fix her," he wrote. "That changed everything. Not her, me." He rebuilt his hobbies, reconnected with friends, and stopped taking her moods personally. He's present for his kids without sacrificing his identity. "She's still unhappy," he said. "She probably always will be. But I'm no longer drowning in it." That lesson cost him a decade. He hopes sharing it saves others. Brother, if this landed, seek clarity. If this helps you make sense of things you've carried silently, join a community of men committed to self-respect, psychological clarity, and building lives that don't revolve around guilt or false responsibility. Protect your peace. Know your worth. Stop carrying weight that was never yours. If this story changed the way you look at the emotional burdens you've been carrying, please subscribe and like the video. We are here to uncover the history and the psychological truths that have been buried under years of expectation. Plant the seeds for your own future and protect your peace. The next treasury of insight will be opened soon.